Greetings, welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the annual 5-month retrograde of the aquatic Neptune, the modern ruler of the sign of Pisces. But what makes this year's particularly intriguing is that Neptune will inverse back into the sign of Pisces for one final time in our lifetimes from the 22nd of October within this retrograde, and will re-emerge into the sign of Aries on the 26th of January. Neptune takes 134 years to go through its entire cycle, and Aries is very much about new beginnings. So when Neptune moved into Aries on the 30th of March, a really seriously big deal. A big deal which is even more emphasized by the arrival of Saturn in a conjunction on the 25th of May. Broadly, I think energy has been affected by that combination, but the sign of Aries is very much about identity, and with Chiron in Aries at the present time and itself going into a retrograde later this month, identity could be what we're grappling with almost immediately with this set of influences. But as ever, we need to be conscious of what the event chart tells us, of when Neptune goes exactly retrograde, what's the overall picture? Because there is some very positive energy that's going to be applying. But generally Neptune retrogrades can be a time of subtlety, a time when we can turn a little bit more inward. We can find ourselves more introspective, thinking about our dreams but also our hopes. But because we're going across two zodiac signs, we have to be conscious of their energy, what their purpose is, and how this is all going to fit together. I'm going to unpack it all for you. I'm going to share the event chart from a solar that we can all collectively relate to perspective, but also the natal event chart based on universal time and the prime meridian. I'm then going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, please stay with me for that, to explore what this will mean from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. A very warm welcome. All your views and interactions are truly appreciated. We have, as I've been mentioning recently, found that 50% of people who regularly watch my videos are not subscribers. Please help the channel to continue to thrive. We've now got 131 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers, and also it's 39 million lifetime views. Do you know, it's such an honour to do this work, and I really appreciate all the support I've had over the years, very much indeed. Thank you too very much to my patrons and also my new YouTube members. If you'd like to become a patron or a member of YouTube, I've set the entry levels at, I hope, a very affordable level. Please check out below. Now, if you would like to have a one-to-one with me, I'm sharing this time on screen some of the testimonials that people have shared about me, only recently, but you can look back over the years and see what people have found through that experience. As ever, you can also order your forecast for 26, get the rest of this year free, 30% off your life roadmap report. It's a stunning package. Please see below for more, or check out my new website at patrickarundell.com. Daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, general, love, Vedic horoscopes, and that brilliant free card tarot. You can also download your free natal chart. Now, getting a free natal chart is pretty easy on the internet, but getting one that gives you a really brilliant interpretation is much more elusive. Please check out mine. So the retrograde begins on the 4th of July at 2 degrees and 10 minutes. So that's in the first ward of the sign of Aries. This is a technique called the 12th harmonic. It's often used in Vedic astrology. You divide each zodiac sign by 12 units. The first 2.5 degrees is very representative of that sign. So we get an amplification of Aries vibe. But because Saturn played catch up with Neptune moving into Aries at the end of March on the 25th of May, Saturn's brought a more restraining influence to the potential benefits of Neptune in Aries. And I feel the combination of both of them has really been asking us to think about our physical energy, how we use the stamina, or how we maintain the stamina we have. We have to look after ourselves with good nutrition, exercise, and critically what we drink. But there are some very good things that have come from Neptune being in Aries. Some of these things may have been manifesting over the last few years, but have come much more into the public consciousness. And Neptune's very much about consciousness. So we could be talking about white hydrogen. We could be talking about converting plastic waste from the sea into building materials. There's also taking seawater and converting it into concrete chips. It's just absolutely brilliant. Now, desalination is not a new engineering per se, but we are going to see new versions of it. I mentioned some while ago about in Japan, they're artificially raising the level of rivers to make sure that hydropower can still be produced even when rainfall is low. And also, finally, quite recently I read about pumping ozone into rivers in the UK to try to cleanse them. Another absolutely fabulous technology. So, as I say, these things have been building up, but we've become much more conscious of them. A bit like when Pluto first went into Aquarius for 11 weeks in March 23, and AI had been coming through, but we became much more aware. It was part of our conversation of how we're all connected, very Aquarius. Now, Aries is about thrust, it's about moving forwards, and Neptune can be a more dissipating energy. So if you put Saturn there as well, that can create a despondency at times, a sense of overwhelm if we don't feel that we can find a way to move forwards and gain traction. So one of the things we could experience through to the 22nd of October, if we don't feel that our situations are particularly strong at the present time, there may be a sense of erosion, because of course Saturn can be about the substance, the structure, and Neptune the water that laps away. So I think particularly through to the 22nd of October, very, very important, and especially with Saturn in Pisces through to the 1st of September, being conscious of maintaining our welfare in a virtuous way really is really, really important indeed. Now, with the retrograde itself, once Neptune returns to Pisces, it only gets to 29 degrees and 22 minutes, so it's on the anaretic degree, emerging back into Aquarius, as I mentioned before, on the 26th of January next year. So, in terms of the Earth points, we've just had the summer solstice, and therefore Neptune was squaring up with that, which was particularly critical, along with Saturn, a challenge for sure to that Cancerian energy. But also when we have the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice, this Neptune position is still going to be a challenge, with the autumnal one an opposition and a square with that Capricorn energy. So even though it's just going to move back into Pisces, a dissociate square will be forged. So energy is going to be at a premium, and we need to use that energy well, but we also need to manage our consciousness, because when Neptune moves back into Pisces, initially it may feel more comfortable, but it can still erode if we let our worries, our dreams, or our expectations in some ways get the better of us. But it's not been easy, because with Neptune moving into Aries along with Saturn, we've seen a very harsh a harsh posture, particularly from government, which can be Saturn, towards those who are less fortunate. We've seen the cutback of overseas grants. And guess what? When Neptune moved into Aries, it was in the 9th natal house. Very much to do with international affairs in terms of our overall connections. But the 9th house can also be about the rule of law and legalities. Neptune can be an influence which distorts and deceives. We have to really be truthful about that. So that wasn't an easy event chart that started the process. This new 100 and around about 33-year cycle as it was then at the end of March. So we do need to know that some of the things that we would hope to achieve as individuals could be challenged through the 22nd of October. And then from then through to the 10th of December, it is possible that we will need to also just keep working hard on our boundaries, being sure about who we are, because of course the sign of Pisces, partly because of the amplification of Jupiter, the traditional ruler, and the wateriness of Neptune, can at times see things really just ebb away. So in terms of the bigger challenges of this retrograde, I think we could see situations where we feel invaded, that distortion, that erosion, lying, misrepresentation, avoidance, anything to do with addiction. There is definitely a shift in terms of victimhood has become, particularly with celebrities, rather too much, hasn't it? So I think there's a shift against that. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we do need more personal responsibility, but it's not so good if there's scapegoating going on. And then in terms of how we're all collectively put together, the planet of the collective is Pluto, and Pluto is going to continue to be in a sextile with Neptune, even when it moves back into Pisces. And although that's a very constructive sextile, they've been in sextile since the end of the war, the Second World War, 1945, the potential for infections, disease, crime, fraud, anything to do with imprisonment and illness and sickness is also amplified by the eclipse series that we've now gone into, which goes between the signs of Pisces and Virgo. So very, very important to continue to be as virtuous as possible. But let's think about the very positive energies that Neptune can bring as well. So it's how we're collectively connected. It can be where we demonstrate our talent around the arts, around filmmaking, photography, music, creativity. Anyone who's very perceptive and works in a world to do with people, whether it's healing, whether it is to do with nurture, whether it's to do with advising, whether it's a psychic domain, whether it is to do with astrology. We may be using the mathematics of astrology, but it's how we relate to people that's really important. There are people who are fabulous technical astrologers, but the humanity, which is going to be challenged, our collective humanity challenged by the electric energies of Uranus and Gemini, it's how we connect in that more humane way that's so important. And no amount of AI is going to take away the value of our personal connections. So whether it is to do with telepathy, or we get that instinct that someone's not having a good time and we pick up the phone and ring them and they say, "How did you know? That's amazing. Thank you so much." The wonderfulness of prayer, of sensitivity, of being open to mystical realms, and also being open to being very caring towards those who are less fortunate. So I think we have had a bit of a deconstruction going on towards those people who are not so fortunate. And what I feel we're going to see, particularly from the 22nd of October, is a pushback to try to protect some rights that have been evolved over many, many moons. Now, what about Neptune in Aries generally? Well, one of the predictions I made when he moved there was that we would see a lot of very hot conditions, and that has been proven. You know, we've got a huge heat wave going on in Europe at the present time and in the UK. I did tell you at the time to embrace your inner cactus. I don't know if you are interested in cactuses. I used to collect them when I was a kid. I only thought about that the other day. I also used to collect matchboxes, stamps. Obviously, I was very much into what is called soccer, football. But yeah, my imagination was was very much around collecting those things. That's interesting, the cactus and also the match boxes, because of the fire of Aries. But because of that connection between Neptune and Aries, we also have the potential, I feel, in terms of the bodily health of things and the Saturnian vibe, to just be conscious of infectious diseases. And it is really, really concerning that we have seen a big cutting back on vaccination programs. Now, you may be someone who has a particular concern about COVID inoculations or vaccinations, which I respect, but there are certain conditions that have been evolving in the world for hundreds of years that have been relatively looked after, and some of those things are spiking up in numbers because of some of the viewpoints about keeping things natural. I'm very much a natural person. I was someone who was very, very careful with what I ate for a very, very long time in terms of being a vegetarian. It doesn't make me particularly virtuous, but I did it for a very long time from when I was very young. And in those days, there was just absolutely no information about it. So, but I feel that practices such as astrology, the tarot, will gain more credence with some people, especially with Uranus moving into Gemini and the golden triangle being forged back to Pluto and back to Saturn and Neptune. But we're also going to see other people being fiercely dismissive. It's interesting how that dismissiveness can come through, but it's usually based on a lack of understanding of what astrology really is. So yeah, that can be the more Saturnian, harsher, authoritarian influence. So we've looked broadly at what Neptune retrograde could be this year, initially in Aries, back into Pisces from the 22nd of October. But to really get into the nuts and bolts, we need to look at the event chart. So the exact moment Neptune stations retrograde is 9:33 p.m, 4th of July, based on Universal and Greenwich because of the prime meridian. On the screen now is the zodiacal event wheel. So we can look at the overall zodiac, starting at 0 degrees Aries, the vernal point, Neptune of course in the first house, but still very close to Saturn. That combination, particularly while Saturn is in Aries through to the end of August, 1st of September, is pushing us to make sure that we're working hard on preserving our well-being. The first house, the sign of Aries, can be the body, and it's about physical energy. So we need to be disciplined, Saturn. But Neptune can erode or dissolve structures. So we may find that our will is a little bit tested at times, particularly because Jupiter, the planet of freedom, independence, but also of exuberance, but in some ways of over exuberance, is squaring up to both, but particularly Neptune. So we've got the two rulers of Pisces are not well aligned, and that can in some ways alter our expectations or our perceptions, but definitely it can exaggerate our reality. So we need to be very conscious of preserving our sense of security, but at the same time standing in our own power. So if we stick with what feels really safe, but we erode our sense of self, that's not so good. But if we push outside what's really safe, we need to really be strong and resilient. So I think that's what that aspect is saying to us. Now we do have a much more encouraging link between Neptune and Saturn and Venus and Pluto. So that's delightful. A golden triangle initially. We're going to also have Uranus moving to join up with Venus on the 7th of July, which will emphasize that electric vibration even more. So that's very, very helpful. It suggests that how we communicate is going to be very important over these next 5 months. But what could be challenging is that we have a T-square between the moon in her full in the deep Scorpio, not a favourite location at all. A T-square between the modern ruler of the sign of Scorpio, Pluto, but also of Mercury. Mercury is very charismatic in Leo. So we're going to encounter messages, Mercury, that in some ways fight for our hearts and minds. But we need to be aware that Mercury opposite Pluto can be very persuasive, but it can also be somewhat dogmatic. And with Pluto in the mix as well, very deep and mysterious in Scorpio, some of what we're being told is going to not be true or is going to be hidden in some ways, particularly because Neptune is actually in a quincunx with the moon. So our need to maintain our identity, which is difficult with Saturn so close to Neptune, is potentially in a way challenged by what we can't really see, or perhaps by our fears, or where we find it difficult to connect to others in a meaningful way. So I think that we need to be realistic about those aspects. The T-square with the moon, the quincunx back to Neptune, but also Neptune and Saturn square to Jupiter. Now that's the overall sense of what we can expect, but what about in terms of a natal perspective? Now I've chosen to use PISCES. That gives us an ascendant in the sign of Aquarius, which can be very idealistic, but it's a 60-degree ascendant. You can see there's an intersection. So the position of the first house goes from 1024 Aquarius to 1053 Aries. So the intersection is on Pisces. That big 60-degree first house. But Saturn and Neptune still in the first house, just like that event chart from a zodiacal viewpoint. What it does do, however, is pitches Pluto into the 12th house. Now Pluto can of course be about the underworld. It can be about ruthlessness. It can be about where people use the levers of power to control. And in the 12th house, interesting, because that's hidden, but also the sign of Aquarius is how we're all connected together. The moon still stays in house 8, but it's more sinister really in this context, 8-12. So I really must stress the need to be very conscious about the messages we're being told. And you can also see that Mercury is right on the 6th, 7th house cusp. So it's going to be important to listen, but listen with a degree of detachment to what we're told. Now Venus and Uranus are still very close together. Of course, they've had a conjunction earlier in the day of the 4th. And what we've got here is Uranus in this illustration moves into house 3, so quick communications. But again, charm can be used. But remember, Gemini is very good at sharing messages, but potentially in a superficial way. And Venus, through its rulership of Libra, can also be at times rather superficial. So we need to make sure that whatever we're told, we think very deeply about what the true meaning is. So to conclude, Neptune is very much about spirituality, but we're also talking about a big cycle that's coming to a close, that began around about 133.5 years ago, that will reach a total conclusion on the 26th of January when Neptune returns to Aries, and that will be the true new beginning, if you like. But this phase of this retrograde is asking us to think about identity, to make sure that we don't let our desire to feel seen, heard and recognized be diminished by power moves, Saturn in Aries, that we look to find our collective voices, Uranus in the conjunction with Venus, that Pluto is also the planet of the collective, is in a sign which can join us together as well as detach us, Uranus moving into Gemini and linking to Pluto can create greater detachment, which isn't good because we need human contact. So Neptune moving back into Pisces on the 22nd of October is encouraging us to keep finding ways that we can look out for one another in whatever way. If we keep using harsh, intolerant language, that we don't see the bigger picture, we don't celebrate the things we have in common, only focus on what makes us different, and we have this very warlike scenario going, it's very abrasive, very confrontational energy going on around the world. It's not good for our souls, which is very Neptunian. So we're getting the chance for a massive reset through this retrograde, and when it moves into the sign of Pisces, don't be fearful of looking at vulnerabilities, secrets, shadow sides of our natures. Embrace them, love them. We've all got wounds, we've all got vulnerabilities. It's part of the human journey. Don't diss them, but at the same time, don't dive into a pool of self-pity. It's about working constructively with whatever we're given, however difficult many lives can be. But it's also keeping a sense of how it is for those who don't share our life journey, who might actually have it an awful lot worse. And if it's all a preoccupation with celebrity and projection, which can, let's be honest, be Neptune, it can be to do with the celebrity culture and all that's going on, there is a degree of trivia to all that. It's the actual reality of life, love, recreation, disappointments, joyfulness through music, laughter, sensitivity, being in touch with people. Those are all the things we've got a final chance, one more, in our lifetimes to reconnect to through this enormously important Neptune retrograde season. So who's going to be affected most directly by this event? Well, it is the early cardinals, so that's Aries, Cancer, Libra and Capricorn, but also it's the late mutables. So in turn that's Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius and Pisces too. But please stay with me because I will go through each of the 12 signs in much greater detail. So Aries, it does depend exactly where you have positions within the sign of Aries. But if you have them very early, you've been feeling the influence of Saturn and Neptune, and that may have seen you change something that you've done for some while may have paused. You're maybe wanting to start afresh. The solar eclipse in your sign in March certainly helped to prime that up, but Saturn being in your 12th house has seen you stepping into the present but also having to clear up the past, and that's kind of being the pattern. So there is frankly going to be some more of that right through to the early part of next year. But Uranus moving into Gemini is going to help you to have much more dialogue, and the ideas that sparks and the sharing of information can really be fantastic, and you might find that other people's viewpoints and perspectives can be extraordinarily helpful to you in terms of helping you to evolve into what's really important for you. So if you have got some very low vitality, I'm not talking about an exact match up with the Louise Hay methodologies, but certainly being aware of it. So if there are worries, if there are unresolved issues, we often have those in the darks, in the depths of our being. Neptune is a very sensitive influence, and there may be things that are very much rooted down that you can work on releasing. I would have thought things like massage would be very good for rinsing out the lymph nodes and really letting go of the toxins and the things that aren't really serving your purpose anymore. But that could also be some relationships around you. It could be people that you've known for a very long time, people who are not even active in your world anymore. Their energy could still be buried deep within you. So I definitely believe in that Gestalt viewpoint that we hold emotions in our bodies, and because Neptune's moving into your 12th house, that's very psychological, very much to the past, can be about who's not entirely truthful or honest or sincere or honourable. So if you have felt betrayed or let down, there may be some areas that you can tackle between now and the end of January next year to really get yourself fully on the front foot to burst into 2026 in truly dynamic form. So Taurus, since Neptune followed by Saturn moved into the sign of Aries, you may have gone through a very profound time, and that may have seen you contemplating cutting ties with situations that, or people that had been quite a part of your life for some time, because we're talking about big cycles of time. So if you've been doing that and working at that, working at letting go, preparing yourself for a new beginning, the intriguing thing with both Saturn and then Neptune hopping back into Pisces is some of the things or the interests or the people that you had thought were permanently gone may actually show signs of having some life still. But you'll be able to work all this out. It will give you a second opportunity to just absolutely check you were on the right track. And by the time we get round to Saturn and Neptune being in an exact conjunction on February the 20th next year, that will be when you have achieved the full journey. At that point, you will know absolutely for certain the decisions that you have made in the interim were rightful and profound. But it's never easy for a fixed sign to accept that things are changing or coming to a close. But I feel that you've also gained a lot of resilience, particularly earlier this year when Saturn was applying to lots of parts of your chart to do with hopefulness, to do with the future. So you may have been going through a period when your future plans felt blocked. Now, or more recently, it may have felt much more psychological. You might have been doing a lot of inner work. You could have a reconnection to certain strands or people, but by the 20th of February next year, you'll have it all completely worked out about what needs to be released for your greater good for the long term. So Gemini, I think it's important, despite the retrograde, particularly with Saturn and Neptune going back into your sector of worldly connections, that you don't give up on whatever it is that's really exciting you, because I feel that Jupiter in your sign didn't get the best rap because of the role of Saturn over the last year. So some of the ideas that you may have been developing were probably brilliant. It's just almost like the world wasn't ready to receive them. More recently, I feel that, and particularly this will become clearer with Uranus moving into Gemini, you will get the ignition point, the spark. Things can start to rattle forwards. What do you need to be mindful of with the Neptune and then the Saturn retrograde in the middle of July? Well, I think really the details have to be nailed down, and you have to make sure that whatever is important to you in terms of your future, the 11th house, your connections, that things are working in a just way. Don't take shortcuts, and be conscious of the rights of people. Even if you've got a fantastically brilliant idea, it's still about how it connects to others that's so important. And because you can be so very skilled in terms of speaking, pivoting, deflecting, using humour, that is definitely a huge skill set. But it could be that some of the techniques that you've used in the past through this retrograde season of both Neptune and Saturn could actually find you getting into a bit of deep water. People will scrutinize what you're saying more. It will be more difficult to use the sheer force of your personality. I think your charisma is going to be amped up, but it has to be used in the right way. Otherwise, when particularly Saturn returns to Pisces 1st of September, followed by Neptune 22nd of October, you're going to get a legacy period which goes through the last quarter of this year and the first couple of months of next year. And so sometimes in life, however much we want a prize, it's very important to go at the right pace, methodically, be as consistent as possible, which can be a bit of a challenge for you at times because you can change your mind. And if you can be consistent, but most of all, very authentic about how you connect to other people, so they see you as not just having brilliant ideas, but being someone they can work with as well. You've got a winning ticket. The retrogrades are not going to deflect you, but you will be tested, I feel. So whatever brilliance is there, make sure it's well structured and it is going to work for the good of all. And that's the critical thing. So Cancer, the big area that's going to come immediately into focus right away, I feel, is your connection to the world at large. Now, if you're doing something in terms of your work which really feeds your soul, gives you enjoyment, you can be a brilliant manager or executive or run your own enterprise. And if it fits with what works for you, it's just going to be important to make sure that your work isn't consuming your whole being and therefore, in some ways, taking away your life force for your own individual needs, because that kind of dedication is laudable and, you know, absolutely fantastic. But remember, the first house, which is for you the Sun and at the moment Jupiter, is about your body. It's about your well-being. It's not just about how people perceive you. So having Neptune going backwards in the 10th house does suggest some rethinking around your work, your professional situation, responsibilities, your ambitions, your goals, and particularly with Saturn going retrograde on the 13th of July. So if you're not enjoying a job, however well paid it is, however much it gives you a profile, however much it gives you status and the material benefits, that's what's going to be tested initially. And then when Saturn returns back into the sign of Pisces, followed by Neptune, that could be the point when you really need to feel freedom. And that's interesting because we often feel about Saturn that Saturn constrains, but really what Saturn asks you to do is have the energy and the determination to seek what's right for you in terms of your higher values. So if you're doing something at the moment that just doesn't feel good professionally, change it. If you're not feeling that your voice is heard in a kind of situation within family dynamics, you don't feel that you're included in the leadership group, it's time to push back and set your boundaries firmer. So Leo, I feel that one of the things that you could explore through to the 22nd of October is whether fact is actually stranger than fiction, because Neptune is retrograde in your 9th house, which can be to do with your philosophies, your highest hopes, your truths. But Saturn's there. You may be encountering someone who has a completely different worldview. It may be that you're dealing with something of a legalistic or contractual nature. If you are thinking about traveling anywhere or doing any overseas business, very important that you're all over the details. When Neptune inverts back into Pisces, it will be following Saturn at that stage, which returns there on the 1st of September. So some of the stuff you were dealing with earlier in the year, shared finances, where you're committed, invested, devoted or not. But remember, the 8th house can be where things make way. But Saturn can create resistance. Neptune finds that difficult in a way because it's limitless. So there may be something that you're grappling with that feels quite challenging from the 22nd of October in particular, because just getting a clear picture of what you're dealing with may prove somewhat elusive. But all of this can push you to get in touch with what your higher purpose is. That's the critical issue for you at this stage, making sure that the truth that you're working with is in fact factually the case, and that will give you a much greater advantage to deal with the confusion and distortion that can come with Neptune retrogrades. So Virgo, I think it's true to say we all have attachments. Some of those attachments can be very positive ones. For example, we can be devoted to our favourite sports team. There may be a particular film that we find inspiring, or a writer whose books we find gripping. But if it's more to do with escapism, which is what Neptune can be about, That can be a bit tricky, particularly in the 8th house, because the 8th house can be what we may be avoiding looking at, or it may be where we feel almost addicted. So if there's something that you're attached to, whether it's gaming, whether it's maybe that cheeky glass of wine that's become a bit too regular, whether it's a flutter, whatever it may be, we need to be conscious of that attachment, because we could kid ourselves with the distorting energies of Neptune, what it actually represents. Now, the fact that Saturn is so close to Neptune may actually be quite helpful, but by the 1st of September, when Saturn inverts back into your 7th house of relationships, followed by Neptune on the 22nd of October, if there's something going on in your life that you do feel gripped by, maybe even addicted to, it may start to really affect a relationship unless you can try to work with it before then and start to try and release. Because remember, the 8th house can be about letting go as much as getting deeply in. So a very sensitive period is about to start for you, Virgo, and it's really down to you to look at what your attachments might be in as honest a way as possible. So Libra, yours is a sign with an exquisite appreciation of connections. It doesn't necessarily mean all your relationships run sweetly. It's because you're an air sign. Your logic and powers of analysis can understand how people interact, even if at times, like us all, not everything may be quite perfect. But Neptune going retrograde could ask you to be much more conscious, not of how things seem, but much more about what they really mean. And that is important, because obviously Neptune can be very complex. So someone could be presenting a response to you which doesn't represent their true feelings. And because of Saturn being in the mix, they could be cool, and the potential for being in some ways gaslit about, well, why are you having that worry? You know, I'm rock solid in your life, whilst you're getting a gut feeling that something's not quite right. Or maybe it's at work. No, of course you're doing a great job. Dismissive, isn't it? Whilst pretending to be assuring. So those are the kind of things you need to watch out for over these next months ahead. And for sure, if you have met someone and it had seemed to be very promising, you're going to find out whether it is going to be durable or not, because of the eroding energies that Neptune can create. But it's also a chance to keep working on qualifying, particularly with Chiron in your 7th house, going retrograde later in the month as well. Keep working on what you are prepared to give, what your standards are, what your boundaries are, being clear about those, being fair, even-handed. Those will be very important to you, because when Neptune, following Saturn, moves back into your 6th house, that part of you that can want to do the right thing by others, to be, you know, very helpful and supportive, it could come up again. And whilst it's good to give in situations, take our responsibilities and obligations seriously, it's also important to know what our minimum standard is. And I think that's really the metaphor for what these two retrogrades are going to represent for you. Firstly Neptune, then Saturn. And that's going to be a big part of the story right through to early next year. Scorpio, Neptune has been in the part of your chart to do with health, fitness, diet, routines since the end of March. Saturn joined up 25th of May. If you have felt a bit oppressed by responsibilities and obligations, daily routines, just feeling that a lot of things fall to you to clear up, maybe you also feel people take you for granted. One of the things that Neptune retrograde is asking you to do, and also Saturn through to the 1st of September, whilst he's still in the sign of Pisces, is to reinforce your boundaries. But it can be difficult with Neptune, because Neptune can see us being guilted in some ways. You know, the type of thing, oh, well, I always help you to cover your shift. And you might think, well, yeah, maybe there was once about 3 years ago. So that kind of stuff is possible. But also you may find it more difficult to be truly clear, because Neptune creates illusion, about some of the practical parts of your life that you do need to be somewhat more virtuous about. And virtue is not always easy when we'd rather actually be doing something different. And I think that the energetic combination of Saturn and Neptune in the 6th house is actually not great. It may have felt that you've been walking through a field of glue. You may only want to do what you absolutely have to do, not anything extra, and that makes it difficult to find the motivation to perhaps to spring out of bed, go for that early morning run and be doing 100 press-ups before you even have your breakfast. But seriously, if you are in some ways kidding yourself about perhaps being too obliging for others, sticking with a job that you're really not liking, or perhaps you're avoiding and putting off being a little bit more self-disciplined about what you're eating and drinking, this Neptune retrograde is certainly asking you to grapple with the situation in as realistic a way as possible. So Sagittarius, for you, Neptune goes retrograde in your 5th house. If you have a talent, a creative spark, some abilities that you want to express, remember Neptune is fantastic for amping up those talents in a very imaginative and projecting way. Neptune retrograde could see you think carefully about whether some modifications are needed. You could find yourself asking some questions. Saturn very close could even see you doubting your abilities, your talents. But just remember what you learned with Saturn over the previous 2 years in a very tender 4th house and Neptune since 2012. During that period of time, your emotional consciousness has skyrocketed. You're much more aware of the things that are at the heart of your world. So this opportunity to showcase may require some modifications. You may not have quite as much energy, physical energy, to go forwards because Saturn and Neptune not great for energy in Aries, but you still have a platform even with the retrograde. The key is to make sure that you're applying the energy you do have in an appropriate way. So that means being careful not to have wishful thinking. And because your ruler Jupiter squares up with Neptune and more broadly with Saturn, very, very important that when it comes to, say, financial progress, and if you're feeling more speculative, then do set realistic targets. But around your love life, which the 5th house can be about, particularly more romantic type of relationships, perhaps the retrograde could, and particularly from the 1st of September, Saturn, when it moves back into Pisces, followed by Neptune on the 22nd of October, you are being asked for one more time through the autumn months in the north and through the spring in the south into the early part of 26 to really make sure that everything's clean in terms of your inner world, because then as we go into the new year and the two connect exactly on the 20th of February, that's going to be your chance in Aries to really launch forwards in a truly brand new world. So I feel that you're getting a taster pack at the moment. There may be some modifications you need to make. You may need to dig down into your resources, but do believe that progress is still possible. So Capricorn, ever since the end of March, you may have become much more conscious on what your connections to others are based on a more emotional dimension, maybe in terms of your family, close friends, your inner world, anything to do with feeling protected and nurtured. Very, very important because of the solar eclipse in Aries, also because of Neptune moving into Aries too, Chiron in Aries as well. That's going retrograde later this month. And then, of course, your ruler turned up on the 25th of May. So how's it all going? How are you feeling about those themes? Because the 4th house is very much to do with a need for stability, but it's also about our environment. So you could live in a beautiful home and the internal parts of that home may be just what you like. But if outside there's a lot of traffic, it's too quiet for you, or perhaps the weather's not quite what you want exactly in that location, these kind of things could be creeping into your senses in a way that you've not experienced quite in the same way before, because Neptune's never been in Aries before in our lifetimes. So for you, I think it's important that you are really attuned to being available to a development around how you feel. And if you're someone who's very determined, very stoic, often the way with Capricorn, but maybe a little bit dismissive of the feeling side of life, of empathy and so forth, I feel Neptune retrograde can actually be a real help to you, to give you the permission to peer into the deepest part of your soul needs. If you are very resistant or very judgy about those things, that can be more challenging. Or is there someone around you who may need your support? And with Saturn so much in a conjunction with Neptune, are you going to be a little bit resistant to pitching in and lending a hand? Could be an older family member, could be someone who has a child in the family who may want your support. Whatever it may be, you're going to find a higher vibration around sensitivities in your inner world over these next 5 months. So Aquarius, being an air sign, you're very much to do with communication. Neptune for you is perched on your 3rd house cusp. Every day, quick fire communications. Neptune could have seen since the end of March you use a little bit more delicacy, subtlety in some of the things that you've been saying, because your traditional ruler Saturn has been side by side with Neptune since the end of May. He's brought a little bit of rigidity and structure to the proceedings. Pretty good, so far so good. What we need to be aware is the 3rd house can, however, be to do with our beliefs, and Neptune, particularly in that square with Jupiter, can in some ways enlarge or amplify our ideals, but in a way that we could try to fit our agenda. So it's just important, I think you can be very detached, very clear about what's important to you, more analytical than most zodiac signs, and especially with Pluto in the mix, applying to Neptune and Saturn in a very constructive way. And on this event, Venus linking back to Pluto also very productively. So I feel that of all the zodiac signs, perhaps this is the most tolerable retrograde for you, but it doesn't change the fact that Neptune in the 3rd house could be a little bit tricky around anything to do with paperwork or texts. There can be misunderstandings, there could be distortions. Very important to keep it clear and keep it very accurate, particularly through to the 22nd of October, when Neptune then inverts back into the 2nd solar house for you again. So Pisces, Neptune, your modern ruler, moved to your 2nd house at the end of March on the back of the solar eclipse. You may have wanted to improve your income, firm up your foundation since then, and Saturn may have helped you since the 25th of May. But Neptune in the 2nd house can be quite disorientating in a way. For example, it may have seen you crave extra sugar. If you've been trying to adhere to a diet, it may have been elusive, particularly over the last week or two with Jupiter squaring off with Neptune. On this event, they're still in that right angle. So the more generous part of your nature could also be amplified. You may want to spoil people rotten that you really like, but grand gestures and big gifts is not the way to go forwards. Saturn's there like the strict parent, reminding you of boundaries and keeping within your means. But if you are wanting to keep to a diet, then just be conscious that that will require some discipline. The other thing with Neptune retrograde in the 2nd house, it can make you think or prompt you to think very deeply about what's really important to you, especially through to the 22nd of October in terms of your values. And Neptune may see you shifting your views. It may be a time of kind of a very mutable energy, but just go with that. But just know that if you're thinking of buying or selling something, it's very important that you get to a factual position before you get involved in the negotiation, because Neptune can be such a trickster and it can really delude ourselves. I don't mean that in a rude way. It can happen to any of us because Neptune is such a subtle influence, but also incredibly potent too.